What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are going to be working on a 2020 BMW 330i xDrive. All right, for the focus of today's DIY, we are going to be covering expansion tank replacement. We're going to be doing both the low temp circuit and high temp circuit systems. On these tanks, the way they fail is typically here at the seam where the two halves are bonded together. If you have seen our B48 expansion tank replacement, that one was a really clear indicator of how the tank had failed. The whole side was in crystallized coolant. So again, it should be a pretty straightforward DIY. For all of these videos, we are going to be covering how to drain and refill both systems, even if they may only call for one or two, but the reality is a lot of this work overlaps. So if you watch this video for the expansion tank, you'll see us drain both systems and fill both systems, which should be helpful, even if you just want to learn how to do a flush, not necessarily replace anything on the vehicle. With that, we also have new caps, which are available separately. Sometimes a cap can be a failure point in these systems. And when things get all covered in coolant, it's hard to tell. So we recommend you do both at the same time. That way you have peace of mind and you know everything is nice and new. Of course, with that, you'll need some HT12 coolant, which we have here on the table, distilled water. And before we get too dicey, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this DIY. All right, for this DIY, we have a large pry bar. Again, this is just insurance for the coolant lines that we're going to be removing to drain the coolant. They can be really stubborn on there. So this is probably way overkill. You can probably use a larger flathead screwdriver, but we have this handy just in case we need it. If we don't use it, we won't use it. We have a torque wrench, a 3/8 drive, a 1/4 inch drive, a couple different picks, and a small flathead screwdriver, a trim removal tool, and a rivet removal set of pliers. We have these other pliers. These are a gear wrench, which are really good for like grabbing hoses and stuff like that. I'm going to try to use them to help me remove the evap lines while I'm down one hand. We have a couple extension and adapters for all the ratchets on the table. We have an 18 mil, a 10 mil, an 8 mil for sockets. And then we have a long and short T30. We have some electric tools, some electric ratchets, and an impact gun to help with some of the hardware. We have our UV vacuum fill tool that is mandatory for filling the cooling system on the G20. So we're going to be using that for both the low temp and high temp circuits, with also running the bleeding procedure that you can do with the car alone. Catch can for your coolant is going to be needed, some shop towels, of course, and then like always, I recommend you watch all the way through in case we add any other tools or sub something out throughout the process. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, to get started on this series of cooling system overhaul, replacement, whatever you want to call it, our first step for all of these is going to be to disconnect the battery. We're going to undo the negative terminal first, 10 mil socket. All right, we'll tuck that baby down, and just as insurance, we'll do the positive terminal as well and let it sit to the side. If you want to be extra safe, you can put some towel or something in between these so they don't make contact. And then just so we don't forget, we are going to either put a towel or just put the trunk liner back in, sticking out so that no one closes this trunk, making it harder to get to the battery when we're done. All right, continuing on from battery removal, again, we're going to be draining both circuits, whether you're just doing the expansion tanks or you're doing the oil filter housing or the water pump, whatever it may be. We're still going to cover how to drain the entire system, since we're going to have to fill either one or both at some point, depending on which video you are watching. But next on our list of things is going to be to remove the caps to the expansion tanks. Obviously, this should go without saying, but you're only wanting to do this on a nice cold system. This car's been sitting in the garage overnight and prepped for today, so it's nice and cold. Last thing you want to do is burn yourself or damage the car. All right, with these two caps off and out of our way, something that can come off now is also our beauty cover. This just lifts up and you can set it to the side. All right, at this point, we are getting a bit closer to draining the high temp and the low temp circuit. In order to get the high temp circuit drained, you can go about it two ways, but both are going to require the removal of the air intake. One is going to be to undo the auxiliary pump, which we will be doing. Also removing one of the lines coming off of the water pump itself. And that's going to drain most of that side of things. The other thing would be, again, to remove this whole air intake box and silencer, then remove the fan, and you can get to the lower radiator hose, of course, once you remove the skid plate underneath. So you can tackle it either way you like. I will show you both. Before I get it into the actual draining though, we are gonna remove this air silencer / air box intake system here so that it's out of our way for all of the following videos that we're working on. All right, we're just gonna work our way around our air box here. We have an electrical connector here that we're gonna undo. With these, you want to free up the little gray tab, just unlock it. Little flathead screwdriver, nice and gently works. Then you can press on the tab and pull back. If you need to, you can use the flathead to pry and release that. You'll see there's a little alligator clip here. We're just gonna pop that off of the intake here using a little flathead. These can be a little bit stubborn if they've never been off before. I have to switch over to a pick tool. But this is going to be a common theme throughout this DIY. There might be wondering, what DIY? All of them. And then for now, we'll just pull it back and tuck it somewhere over the valve cover. From here, we have another alligator clip that rides onto the top of our silencer. We just need to free that one off of the, we'll call it the air box assembly. All right, that can stay loose for now. If you can see right next to that, we have another little gray connector here. We're gonna release that baby up. Following this line, we're gonna go to this PCB line right here. We have two ridge sides to this connection that goes on top of our valve cover. We're gonna pinch on both sides and then lift the line off. There we go. I just use these pliers. My right hand is out of commission, so I'm a little limited to what I can do with my left hand, but squeezing these two tabs helps release that. As we pull out this whole thing, I think what we're gonna do here is disconnect our plug on top of our turbo here. And that's just gonna help free up this harness so that we don't have to really worry too much about bending things around to clear that as we pull out the air box. So this will give us a little bit more working room. Again, just a little gray lock there. Once it's out, press down, pull that baby back, and this can swing up here as well. That'll be out of our way. Still have another PCB line to undo. You're gonna see the one up top here. There's another connector actually at the bottom. That's what's going into our intake. So we're gonna release it from down here. Squeeze both sides, same thing, and then try to pull up and release. I'm gonna come from the passenger side. To give us a little bit more room to see exactly what we're breaking here, we're gonna undo this flathead clamp and just separate the air box from the rest of the intake. It's gonna make our lives a little bit easier. Thread this baby back together, and we'll throw that back on our air box once we pull it out. These are just held in by rubber grommets. You can pull it out as a whole and then set this to the side. Now with that off, we can see a little bit better what we have going on. Here's that vacuum line down here at the bottom. These clips are toast just from touching them. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna release the feed from the turbo. You can see just a little bit on the top, part of that quick disconnect clamp, similar to the coolant lines. You can also see it underneath the diverter valve. Take a peek from underneath. So now we're gonna release the clip going to our turbo from the inlet, and that way we can try to pull this whole assembly towards us a little bit and get that last PCB line out. It's okay if this flings off, just don't forget to reattach it after the fact. Now we should be able to pull this back. If it's still hung up, then more than likely your clip is still doing something, in which case you can continue to remove it or pull it off the rest of the way. I'm gonna reach in there for 1 sec. Now we're gonna squeeze these two together again, do our best to try to get this line off. Although these tabs are cooked from living so close to the turbo, we might have to replace them, in which case we will drop that in the video description below. All right. And with that, we can pull this assembly out, giving us way more room to not only the fan and the coolant lines going to the radiator. Once we get this charge pipe out of the way, though, we'll have room to our water pump, our serpentine belt, all that good stuff over here on this area. So let me set this to the side and we'll go on from there. So on the quest to drain our high temp circuit, we have our charge pipe here, which you can see now clearly goes down here. So we're going to undo that clip similar to the one we just did at the turbo inlet. We have 2 electrical connectors. Then we have a couple Torx holding this on to the throttle body. So let's start with the electrical connectors. We'll disconnect those first, and then we'll move on to the Torx, then the clip at the bottom, and we'll pull this baby out of our way. We have 3 T30s. I'm going to start blasting these off. Use our bottom one closer to the alternator, the extended T30. Pull back, gentle pull back, and look at all the room that gives us. I'm gonna set this baby to the side, and then we'll go from there. All right, at this point, we are almost ready to start draining the side of the high temp circuit, again, via BMW's instructions by the auxiliary pump here and our main water pump. Before we do that though, the reality is most of the coolant is just gonna drip down the front of the block, over our steering rack, subframe, all that good stuff, which is fine. We can clean that up. There is no drain petcock on this system that you can just go from underneath and release, unfortunately. That's something that they kind of have done away with on these models. So what we're gonna do before we do anything else is remove the lower skid plate so that our coolant can go straight through to our catch pan. We will also remove the lower driver's side, if you will, like belly pan, part of the fender liner. That's gonna give us access to the coolant line for the low temp circuit. Let's get underneath. Too much talking. Skid plates, maybe we'll just rip the low temp circuit while we're down there, and then we'll go from there. All right, to get us started, we have 10 8mm for the center shield. Then we'll move on to the one on the driver's side. Removing that one actually gave us access to our low temp circuit line, which is excellent. So you don't really have to worry too much about this side. But we still do need to get this plate off, which is why we removed this front one to expose our hardware. So with that, let's blast this baby out of here. All right, we have 9 18mm bolts holding in this bottom shield. Let's zap these babies out. All right, with that panel removed, now that's gonna open up all the area here for our coolant to kind of trickle its way through. Before we get back down on the ground though, let's take advantage of being up here with the hose here for our low temp circuit now. And we'll go ahead and pop that out. We'll drain it. Once it's done draining, we'll plug it back in and then we don't have to worry about it. Again, if you want a little bit more room to work with, there is 3 more 8mm here at the front. And you have another 3 here on the inside of the fender liner holding on this cheek. But I think we should be fine. Our clip is right here. So let's get our catch pan. Again, lid is off of the expansion tank up top. Let's get that baby drained. First, we're gonna release the clip to our coolant line. I'm just using a small pick to get in here since it's a little tiny spot. Small flathead would work too. All right. And then this is the part where we take a shower. So we're gonna position our catch pan as best as we can, and then work this line off. There we go. Man, that took a whole 25-inch pry bar to free up that hose. That's how stuck these O-rings can get. All right, we're gonna let that do its thing. We'll let it drip, and then we'll come back and plug it back up. With our low temp system drained, we're gonna pop our hose back on, then I'll throw the clip back on, but that will be good for the low coolant or low temp system. So we'll throw a clip back on there, and then we'll be good to rock and roll. All right, with that part of the system drained, now we're gonna head back up into the engine bay. We'll get a lower catch pan for our coolant for the high temp circuit underneath the car, and we'll go from there. All right, next on the list is going to be removing our auxiliary pump. For those of you just doing the serpentine belt DIY, you can simply undo the clamp and just swing the pump out of your way. But for everything else, we are draining the cooling system. So again, we're going to continue on with the high temp circuit now, starting at the auxiliary pump. So we're going to move that out of our way in full. So if you're just doing the belt and tensioner, you can just unplug the electrical connector and then swing the pump out of the way. We have our catch pan situated down below. Now we're going to get our coolant line here. I'm just going to pop this baby up, same as the other lines we've been doing. So you'll see this magenta coolant coming out of our system. This indicates that your car more than likely has been at a dealer for a repair. And between BMW switching from the blue coolant to the green coolant, at one point the dealers were having to use this magenta pink stuff. And that was like a good way for them to keep track of, what's been through the dealer network for a repair versus not. So more than likely this was in for something, whether it was warranty work or post-warranty work. This car has had a rough previous life. So that's just something to note. We're going to be filling this up with green, but totally compatible, just something funky in the old BMW world. While that's still draining, we're going to do the other line here. All right, we're going to let this drain for a little bit, and then we'll come back up to removing the rest of the auxiliary pump. Next, we'll undo our little electrical connector. We have a 10 mil down below holding the clamp together for this auxiliary pump. And then that pump can come out. We'll leave the bracket with the pump, and I'm going to throw the 10 mil nut bracket here so that we don't have to guess where that goes later. And then we'll probably fight with it later when we're dealing with this hose. All right, moving on, you can see on this little damper cover, this little resonator cover that we have on the front of the engine block, we have a couple more alligator clips here. We're going to release these so that when we pull this cover off, this harness can kind of do its own thing. So there's one. We have one more here. I'm just going to open up this baby here. The other thing we can probably do is just pull the rivet out of the cover here, but sometimes that can rip too, depending on how old the stuff is. Let's see if we can, that one's putting up a little bit of a fight. So I'm just trying to split this clamp open here. Just easier said than done. There we go. All right. Wonderful. We have one more alligator clip that goes to the lower auxiliary pump here, and down below you can see the connector for it. I don't really think this will be in our way, but just for sake of filming and giving you the best view, we're going to go ahead and undo it. So let me separate the alligator clip off the auxiliary pump first. And then if we follow that down, we'll see our electrical connector down below. I'm going to unlock that gray tab as carefully as I can. Now with that, we have a couple expanding rivets to remove to get this little cover off. So let's work on that next. I'm going to use a little 5-head screwdriver to try to pop these babies open. You can use rivet removal pliers, which we have, but I mean, again, we don't have to add more tools than already needed to this list. Let's just keep it nice and simple here, shall we? We have a third one hiding behind the auxiliary pump that we just did the electrical connector from. It's going to be a little bit sneaky to record, but it is there. In the sky. I'll get that one after. We have one more here on the bottom corner. That's going to be right down there on the bottom left. All right. Here's a better view of that cover. We had rivet 1, rivet 2, 3 behind the auxiliary pump, and 4. We're going to clean this up, set it to the side, but now we have a way better view. And before we get too carried away here with the high temp draining, you can take a look actually. And right behind that coolant hose, you'll see a lot of dried pink stuff here. So either it had a leak at one point, or it's just starting to leak enough where it's only starting to get a little bit coated here. I don't know, we'll have to see once we get this hose out. But next, to continue with the high temp draining, high temp circuit is going to be this clamp here. So let's get ready for that. Now to finally drain the high temp circuit, we're going to undo what is essentially the lower radiator hose. We're going to pull that clip out and then see what our luck is at pulling this hose off. All right, so next on our laundry list of things is going to be to remove the tanks. Now that our cooling system, both systems are drained, we have 2 expansion tank lines running 1 to each tank. Up top, we have an electrical connector for the high temp circuit. We're going to start with the low temp circuit tank first. We'll get that expansion tank line undone. We'll get this clip undone, which is going to be in our way. And then these 2 tanks are actually clipped into themselves. We'll show you here on the new one. We have our high temp circuit tank, which is sitting in the car like so, and our low temp circuit tank. This one has a bracket on it that's going to key into the tank right here, like that. So you can see that's right by our electrical connector, which is also by where the harness runs through, and it's being riveted on here. So we'll pop the plug off, get the rivet out, and then we'll have access to the release tab. You'll notice at the bottom of the tanks also have some more ports on them, and that's where the feed lines go. So we're going to have to undo this one as well before we fully pull out the tank. And then there's just another little set of clips that bite into the, you call it like the fender lining of the car or the wheel well, which help keep it in place. So a couple things as we lift it up, but pretty straightforward. We'll start with the expansion tank line. We have a quick release clip up top. I'm just going to use my little pick to pop it open. And then we can try to work this line off. There we go. Then we're going to pop this line out of the holder that's on our high temp circuit, right behind the air conditioning line here. Just going to push it out of the way, and then we'll tuck it out front somewhere. Now let's tackle this electrical connector. It's got a release tab up front. These are like Audi Volkswagen style connectors. We're going to see if we can get a pick under here, sneak it underneath the tab, and try to release this connector with this right angle pick. There we go. I just went up from underneath and got behind this release tab, and we popped it up. Now we're going to release it from the tank itself. Here is our little clip that we're going to free up from the expansion tank. It's one of those plastic tees with some like electrical tape or felt running around it that helps keep the wires in place. But these can be a little bit tedious to get to sometimes. See if I can use our trim removal tool or our rivet removal tool to get it up. There we go. Tuck this baby back here. And now we have access to that release tab, which is hiding right there. So we're gonna get in with our flathead, push away from the high temp circuit tank, and then start wiggling the low temp circuit tank up and out of the way. Again, being mindful that there's gonna be the back side, which is still biting onto the inside of the fender, which we're gonna also have to work up. Now we have our coolant line down below, which again, luckily for us, BMW really does not give us a lot of play. I think the move here, at least we're gonna attempt something here, is going to be to let this hang out here, work on getting the high temp tank out next, and then hopefully that gives us some more slack to get to the low temp circuit tank line underneath. So let's work on freeing this up now. For the high temp circuit, we have another clip holding it down. That's going to be this guy right here. So we're going to pry off the tank onto the clip, and then we'll start working it up that way. All right. I would argue that we can work the high temp circuit tank out next, and then the low temp. You can do either or. You can get into both. So for that, that's how I think we're going to continue approaching it, since that was our goal, to get the high temp out so that we had an easier time getting the low temp out. But the amount of room we have to get to both of the lower hoses for each one is about the same, with or without them being next to each other. So we're going to tackle the high temp circuit now. We have a coolant line right next to the AC line. See if we can pop that baby out, and then we'll take the low temp out. Our clip is luckily facing in a spot that we can get to. The right angle clip is gonna make this a little bit easier. So we're just gonna sneak in there, get that baby popped open, and then try to use our flathead to work the line off. From back here, there we go. And here is our high temp circuit tank. We are going to be stealing the sealing cap off of it. Unfortunately, BMW does not include that with the new tank. That was an oversight on my part, but we will be linking it in the video description below if you want to put a freshie on your tank at home. Maybe I'll run into the warehouse and grab one too. Now we have a bit more room to get to the low temp circuit tank, so at least we have one easy win. All right. That one's undone. All right, and now our low temp circuit tank is out. So I'm gonna clean some of this debris up a little bit, and then we are going to work in the reverse, get our new tanks in, and then we'll start buttoning things up and get this baby filled up with some coolant. We're gonna take our low temp circuit line. We have the fitting a little bit lubed up with some dielectric grease. The lock is locked for the line so that we can hear the click when it's fully seated. Bam. That one is ready to rock and roll. We're gonna do the same thing with the high temp circuit. Just be sure you'll see the new tank comes with a rubber grommet. Make sure the old one came out of your fender liner, wheel well hole, this cavity right here, before you go and put the new one in. Otherwise, you're gonna be fighting double grommets. But same thing, we're gonna feed this baby down. This little clip here, this bites into right where the lower tank sits. You'll see there's a metal tab coming off the frame rail right in front of the hose right there. And that's gonna help you line this up as it goes back in. Let's see if this helps. What I'm trying to do is free up the expansion tank line. See if I can pop it out of this clip that holds it in so that we have more slack to get our tank hooked up. Oh yeah, okay. It's just another alligator clip. Oh yeah, that's what we needed right there. Oh yeah, baby. Let's get this clip back on that expansion tank line. There we go. Now we can lock in the low temp circuit tank to our high temp circuit tank. There we go. It's beautiful. Electrical connector. Little tab for the harness here, the expanding rivet. Let's get this expansion tank line back in. A little bit of lube. This is a new line that we installed during the oil filter housing and heat module DIY. It comes right off the cylinder head. This line can tuck back into the high temp circuit. Little clip there. Lock that. Let's put a little bit of juice on that. Boom, baby. All right, I'm gonna put a new seal or a new cap on that side. Boom, baby. All right. At this point, we have our new tanks in. Those are ready to rock and roll. We're gonna get our auxiliary pump, the acoustic cover for the engine, all that stuff buttoned back up. We'll hook up the lower radiator hose once more. And then we're just gonna button up the car back up. We're gonna get our intake system back in, and then we will get the beauty cover and basically have this looking like a full car again. We'll throw the shields on at the bottom, and then we will work on filling the car up with coolant. So let's do that now. All right, now that we have that baby situated, we can reattach our lower radiator hose back onto the pipe coming out right beside our water pump. Same thing, a little bit of lube on that O-ring, it's gonna go a long way. These are gonna go to our auxiliary pump, which before we throw that baby on, let's go ahead and get our acoustic cover situated back on. We're gonna get our 4 expanding rivets started. Get those babies lined up. There's 1, 2 is going to be behind these lines. Just why we keep the auxiliary pump out and out of the way. 3 is going to be in the lower left corner. So there's the rivet there. Then we're going to push it in. And then 4 down below our lower auxiliary pump. A little bit tight to see, but you can just get in there. All right. With that baby in, let's get our auxiliary pump bolted back up to the bracket, and then we'll clip in the lines and the electrical connector for it. Just taking off the 10 mil that I situated on here before. We're gonna get this baby on, back over its stud, get that 10 mil nut back on. And let's snug up that 10 mil with the electric ratchet once more. Both of these coolant lines can get plugged back into the pump. There's 2. We have our auxiliary pump electrical connector, which we had swung up over here. That's going to come back down and plug in to the bottom of our pump, right up front there. All right. Alligator clip off the pump bracket right here. This line runs off the front here on this little clamp. And then this guy was also clipped to the acoustic cover right in front of this lower coolant line. So pretty straightforward, just keeping everything nice and tidy. Oh, you know what? This is gonna have to run behind the 2 coolant lines. So I'll pop those off really quick and we'll feed the line behind it. And then we can hook those coolant lines back up. No big deal, it'll take 2 seconds, but that's why taking photos and that kind of stuff when you take things apart will go a long way. While we're here, we can also plug in the auxiliary pump. All right, we're gonna get our charge pipe back in, get that fit in here underneath the turbo. There we go. Hear that little click. That means we're locked in. Give it a little bit of a twist. Helps heat that O-ring. We're gonna lock this baby up over here. This is gonna key in to the throttle body so that it sits in proper, and then we'll get the 3 T30s started. I'm just gonna use the 1/4 inch ratchet to give them a gentle snug. Torque spec for these T30s are 8 Newton meters, not a whole lot. So we're just gonna give them a little cinch. I'm taking this car right back apart after this video, but 8 Newton meters if you wanna put a torque wrench on it. We have an electrical connector here and an electrical connector here that we need to plug back in. This one can go in right here. You'll see that most of these wires kind of rest in their natural spot of where they want to be. Let me get this one right here. Alligator clip. All right, let's continue on with the next few bits. All right, we're gonna feed in the silencer portion of our box. This goes right into the turbo inlet. Before we click that baby all the way in, I'm gonna get that evap line situated onto here first. Beautiful. Just gonna plug this baby in. Let's wrap this underneath these other 2. Okay, beautiful. Now we can click this all the way into the turbo. Give it a couple pulls, make sure it's not gonna come out. We'll hook up that other evap line up top in a little bit. All right, let's take care of our diverter valve. That one's gonna run through the front here of this evap line. Click that baby in. That's gonna bite down on this air box right there. This can plug back into the valve cover, like so. All right, that's locked in down there. We have one more evap line that runs from the vent valve, or it's a 2-piece vent valve and the intake manifold down to the inlet feed by the turbo, so we can clip those babies in next. Here is our old one that we pulled off, and you know, the top one is in pretty good shape, the one with the sensor on it still, but we do carry all of them individually, so We bought both of them, and I'm gonna join them here. That one's good to rock, and then we'll hook them up. Let's hook them up over here to the turbo side of things first. We have our electrical connector right here. All right, that baby's all situated. Now let's get the other part of our airbox in. It's easier to feed these grommets back into the strut tower than to try to install it with the airbox. So if they came up with you, just take them off. All right, this baby is nice and situated. Let's get it plugged back in. That's gonna be this connector right here. Lock that baby in. Alligator clip right here. Boom. All right, let's head underneath. Let's button up those shields, and then we'll come back up top and get the battery situated in the trunk, and then we can move on to filling and bleeding the coolant system. All right, we had ended up taking out this corner shield just to give you a better view of the low temp circuit coolant line that we drained from, to drain the cooler from. So we're gonna throw that one back on first, a couple 8 mils, then we'll move on to the middle piece and then the rear half, and we'll be one step closer to being done. All right, let's switch over to the torque wrench. And these 18 mils get torqued to 56 Newton meters. All right, now let's get the last bit of plastic shielding in, and we'll head back up top. All right, they're all started. I'm just gonna snug them up real quick, and then I'll meet you in the trunk. We'll get the battery hooked back up, and then we'll fill this baby up. All right, it has come time to fill our cooling system. We're gonna be filling the low temp and high temp circuit. Total capacity for the two systems combined is just about 14 liters, 9.8 for the high temp, 4.1 for the low temp. Again, that's assuming that they are fully empty. We didn't crack the block anywhere, so there's probably gonna be a little bit of coolant there. So we have enough coolant if we were doing these from a completely dry fill. We have 2 gallons of HT12 concentrate and 2 gallons of distilled water mixed together. We're gonna fill these both up, and then from there we'll talk about how to run the bleeding procedure. They're pretty similar for the low temp and high temp circuit, with the exception of the high temp requiring the engine to be ran. So we'll kind of go over that. We'll start with the low temp, see if both systems are being bled with the electronic pumps, and if not, we'll still cover the high temp circuit per BMW. So first things first, we have our U-View tool ready to rock and roll. We'll start with the high temp circuit, fill that up, and then we'll move to the low temp, and then we'll talk again about the bleeding and go a little bit more in depth. All right, we have our air hooked up. We're gonna get that valve closed, and we're gonna pull vacuum. I like to use a towel around the breather valve here. Sometimes it can mist out whatever's in the system, and you don't wanna get coolant all over the place if you don't have to. And we're gonna try to hit about 25 on our gauge. Once we pull vacuum to about 25, we're gonna let it sit for a minute or two, just to make sure we have no leaks. It's totally normal to see the coolant lines starting to collapse on themselves, which is exactly what you want to see. What you don't want to see is that needle dropping after you have stopped. That means you have a leak somewhere. So let's hope to avoid that. All right, we can see the upper radiator hose is totally collapsed under that AC line. Just peeking underneath the air box, I can see the lower one is totally folded in on itself too. That's exactly what we want to see. Our gauge is staying perfect. It has not dropped the hair, which also means that not only is our cooling system not leaking, but our tool isn't leaking too. That can be a big problem if the tool is bad that you're using. I'll let that sit for a minute, and then our next job is going to be to ensure that this feed line always remains at the bottom of your coolant bucket. If at any point air goes in there, it's going to totally kill the process. It's going to allow air into the system. You'll have to drain and do this again. So let's try to avoid that. So yeah, I'll see you in a minute, and then we'll go from there. All right, what I'm going to do first might be a little bit overkill, but it's something I like to practice here. I'm going to keep my line submerged. I'm just going to fill the bleed tool or prime it first. So I'm going to open that, let the coolant hit the valve, close it right away. We'll pull vacuum for another 5 seconds, and then we'll open it in full. So now the system's primed. Let's pull vacuum for another minute. All right, now we're going to open that valve, keeping this line fully submerged, and we'll stop once it stops pulling coolant. All right, at this point, our tool is done feeding our high temp circuit. You can also start to see some air here in the line, which is totally fine. We're gonna lift this up and move over to our low temp tank. We have 1.75 gallons, so just under 2 gallons of coolant left, which means this took just over 2. We have a total capacity of 4.1 liters for the low temp circuit, so just over a gallon. So we have more than enough coolant here to take care of that. All right, same thing, we're gonna pull vacuum on this, we'll prime the line, and then we'll let it fill. Now it's been sitting, gauge is good. Let's prime this line once more. All right, now I'm gonna open up the valve, keep the line at the bottom, and just make sure we don't run out of coolant in our bucket. All right, at this point, the low temp has stopped taking in coolant. We're gonna remove our air, line off of the tool. We're gonna close the valve, open this up gently, and then we'll open up the valve and let the coolant back into our bucket. This we'll throw back into our BMW containers. We'll write on them that they're mixed, so we know they're good for topping off or filling this car up. Once we get all cleaned up, then let's pick it up with the bleeding procedure. We'll cover both of the procedures for the high temp and the low temp circuit, and then we'll start with the low temp circuit. All right, for the high temp and low temp circuits, you want the expansion tanks at the min level. There's a yellow circle inside that shows your max. It's a 2-step bit. The top is your max, the bottom is your low. You're gonna wanna set both of them to low before you run the bleeding procedure. We have the low temp circuit set already. I just pulled some coolant out of the high temp circuit. We're gonna put the lids on. I'm not gonna close them fully just yet, because while we run the low temp circuit bleeding, I wanna see if anything's actually happening to the high temp circuit. Regardless, we're gonna run the high temp bleeding procedure right after the low temp one. So with that, let's hop in the car and let's get this thing going. All right, so let's talk about the bleeding procedure really quick and how the low temp and high temp circuits differ a little bit. Again, this is all per BMW. The goal here is that we're gonna be putting the car in a service mode basically. So using the start stop engine button, we're gonna hit that 3 times quickly with our foot off the pedals. And then from there, the key to keeping the car awake long enough to run the bleeding procedure, which is about 11 minutes, we're gonna have to turn on the low beams and the hazards at the same time. That'll keep the ignition from turning off and cutting the bleeding procedure short. It helps to have a battery tender on your battery, especially if your battery is a little bit older during this whole process, as 11 minutes is a bit of time and you do have lights and hazard lights running at the same time. Once the hazard lights and the low beam lights are on, we're gonna make sure that the car is not in Eco Pro mode. We're gonna turn our temp setting on the heater controls here to the highest, with the fan setting to the lowest. Once we have those things taken care of, we're gonna hold our foot on the accelerator pedal for about 10 seconds. And then from there, we should audibly be able to hear the auxiliary pumps engage. At that point, the service is just gonna run for about 11 minutes, again, which is why we recommend you put a tender on that battery. Once that's done, then we can go back into the expansion tank, check the level, and set the low temp cooling circuit to the full line. Now, where things get a little bit different for the high temp circuit, I have a feeling that both water pumps are gonna actuate for both circuits. However, per BMW, to properly bleed the high temp circuit, we're gonna do all of the mentioned previously. We're gonna set low beams on, hazard lights on, temp to the highest, fan speed to the lowest, foot on the accelerator pedal for about 10 seconds. And then from there, we're gonna start the car. We should see a service function on the dash that's saying in service mode, and it's gonna run the car and control the RPMs for the next 11 minutes, keeping it at about 3,500 RPM. So it's important that the car is in park on the ground tanks are sealed up, hood is closed, as if you were gonna drive almost, and then just let the car do its thing for about 11 minutes. From there, you're gonna wanna let the car fully cool down, or at least below 50 degrees Celsius, so that you can open the cap safely and check the coolant level there. So again, a little bit different. Once we get the low temp circuit bleeding, we're gonna hop over to the front and just take a look and see if we can see the coolant flowing through the low temp circuit expansion tank, and then see if we see anything on the high temp side as well. I have a feeling both are gonna run, but again, high temp requires the engine running. So let's start with the low temp cooling circuit first. And for that, we're gonna start stop engine 3 times quickly. We're gonna turn on low beams. We're gonna turn on our hazards. We're gonna set our temp to the highest. We're gonna turn that off. We don't need that. That's fine. We're just gonna point through the center vents. We're gonna turn our blower speed down as much as possible. All right. I'm gonna make sure that the car is not in Eco Pro mode. I don't believe it is. Now we're gonna hold the throttle pedal for about 10 seconds. On the dash, we have service function started. And now we let the car sit for about 11 minutes. Again, tender's on. Let's hop up front and let's take a look and see if we can see the coolant flowing through that low temp circuit tank and maybe something out of the high temp circuit. For the high temp circuit, we're gonna do exactly the same once this procedure finishes for the low temp, except after we do the throttle pedal for 10 seconds, then we're gonna start the car. So I'll see you in a little bit again when we go to do that. We don't have anything happening just yet, but we did hear the auxiliary pumps actuate a second ago. Here we go. You can see coolant flowing on the low temp side. Do we have anything over here? Nothing on the high temp. It's not a bad idea to keep an eye on this. If you need to top it off a little bit to keep it at that low level, you can. As long as there's coolant in the tank and something for there to flow, you're gonna be fine. All right, so with that, we're gonna let the 11 minutes lapse and then we'll pick it back up and do this again, but for the high temp circuit. And again, just to reiterate, nothing is happening with the high temp system right now. There's no coolant flowing, which means we are gonna have to follow the separate procedure for the high temp, which requires starting the engine. So I'll see you in about 11 minutes, or a second for you, I suppose. I don't know, grab a snack or something if you want.
11 minutes later.
At this point, our 11 minutes are up. The low temp circuit is looking great. I need a splash of coolant and that's gonna hit the max mark. Once I get that done, we're gonna throw the cap on that. We're gonna throw the cap on the high temp circuit. Just taking one last look at where the level is right now. Put the cap on it, and then we're gonna initiate the same procedure again, plus starting the car, letting it run for 11 minutes. The car is gonna do its own thing from there. And then once that's done, we'll turn the car off, let it fully cool down, and we'll top off the coolant level as needed. All right, now we're gonna do the high temp circuit bleed. Hood is closed, car is on the ground. We're in park, all 4 wheels are touching the ground again. We're gonna do the same thing. Start, stop engine 3 times, hazards, low beams, temp on high, fan on low, accelerator pedal for 10 seconds. Then we're gonna start the car and we should see a service function started on the dash, at which point the car is gonna control the RPMs and go from there. High, fan on low. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One more for insurance. Start the car. Service function started. That's exactly what we want to see. From here, we're going to let the car run for 11 minutes. That's the length of the bleeding procedure. The car is going to control the RPMs. They're going to drive up as high as 3,500 RPM and so on and so forth. When the service is done, it's going to drop down back to idle. And it's worth mentioning that because the car is running, you don't really need the tender at that point. The car is going to be charging. However, we're going to leave everything else as it is. The hazards on, the low beams on, the door open, and just let the car do its thing. Catch you in 11 minutes. All right, with our car back together and our cooling system bled, our low temp and high temp expansion tanks are ready to rock and roll, hopefully for another 100,000 miles at a minimum. Overall, a really straightforward job, a little bit involved getting the intake out of the way to drain the high temp circuit, but nonetheless, totally doable. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you'd like to see more like them or see the other 5 that are in this series, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.